Ready? So the title of this exhibition by Ai Weiwei is Fault Line, and it's a play on words, of course. So the exhibition itself is all work which stemmed from his investigation into the 2008 Wenchuan earthquake, which was an earthquake which struck Sichuan province. It was an 8.0 magnitude earthquake, which killed somewhere in the neighborhood of 70,000 people, of which almost over 5,000 were school children who died when government-built schools collapsed upon them. And so in the selection of the title of this show, of course, I'm playing on the double meaning of fault. You have the fault line, which would be a geological structure, something which slips, and then fault, having made an error for which you have to come up with some sort of responsibility that's implicit inside of that. So you're drawing a line where there is fault and there is not fault. So when that earthquake struck, Ai Weiwei became really incensed that the Chinese government, especially the Sichuan government, was suppressing the information of what was happening inside of that earthquake zone and inside the place where all the devastation happened. It was very clear that there was very high mortality, and so he went there and set up what's called the Citizens Investigation. And this was a group that was made up of over 100 people, and they went and they stationed themselves outside of the collapsed schools and canvassed the neighborhoods to try to find out how many students had died, who they were, what their names were, when they were born, their gender, what class, how old, where they lived, all that type of material, all that type of information. And ultimately, they collected 5,196 names. And that's what this backdrop is that I'm standing before you right now. So starting over here at the top is number 1, and ending over here is number 5,196. And this name list forms almost like an atmosphere for the rest of the show. This becomes this backdrop. It's simply some sort of a database file. It's like an Excel file. But when it becomes huge like this, we've got a name list which is 10.5 feet tall and stretches over 43 feet along here. It becomes something larger than just a database. It becomes an object which we get to encounter, which you can go up and you can read. It becomes part of the wall itself. And you get some sort of sense of the just giant mass of names. It's a very emotional piece if you allow yourself to see that and understand that each one of those names represents a single life. So there are 3 pieces to the show. There's the Sichuan name list. Then on the back wall over here, we have a video which is called Little Girl's Cheek. And that's a video which is of all the different documentary video that was collected while they were doing their investigation, their citizens' investigation. And those two form kind of the informational. This is the information which they collected in that process. And then we have this third piece, which is here in the middle, which is called Case and Rebar. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute. So in the process of collecting this information, it wasn't easy. And Ai Weiwei and his team of 100 plus people were confronted and harassed by the police 45 times during that. At one point, they actually broke into his hotel room. They beat him, and other people beat Ai Weiwei badly enough that he got a brain hemorrhage and was hospitalized. So he was really doing something which was quite dangerous to do. It's hard for you perhaps to imagine that an investigation like this into some sort of natural catastrophe could could be so dangerous politically, but that is the case. That was the case in China in 2008. And this is where I think an artist like Ai Weiwei becomes so interesting, because we tend to draw very strict boundaries between art and politics and human rights advocacy and all of our different types of disciplines. We think about them as discrete entities. And those boundaries just really don't seem to exist for Ai Weiwei. He just doesn't seem very interested in perpetuating them. And as he was there, he's also working with his mind as an artist. I think that it's very helpful if you think about Ai Weiwei as a material philosopher, as someone who looks at material and thinks about the logic of that material, thinks about the stories that are inside those materials, and then begins to work with those. So out of the rubble of these schools were called the tofu schools, tofu dreg schools, because they're built with substandard concrete that just had literally no binding capacity. It was just being held together by the merest of bonds. And then there was far too little rebar that was in them. So they'd been built not following earthquake code. That's why they collapsed. And in that rubble, he began to see all these scrap collectors that were going through, and they were collecting pieces of rebar, and they were pulling them out of that rubble, and which they were going to take and then sell on the secondary market. They were recycling that material. So he bought that material. He put out a call, said, "I want this rebar." He ended up collecting over 200 tons. I don't know the exact amount that he bought, and he had all that twisted rebar sent to his studio in Beijing, where he began to work with it and make a whole variety of different pieces with it. And this is one of them. So in this particular case, what you see here, what looks like rebar, actually isn't the original rebar. He took twisted pieces of rebar that were pulled from those buildings, and then he made exact replicas of that rebar out of marble. And I think it's very interesting to contemplate what that kind of replication might mean. Why would someone go about doing that? And it's really important to note that Ai Weiwei himself does not interpret his work. He's very consistent about that. And instead, he lets his audience come and interpret it. It lets his audience come and discuss that. And I think that this is a very, very interesting thing to note. I think it's especially important as a docent for you to be aware of that, because part of the joy and part of the actual artwork itself is your chance to come in and start to construct the story. You're constructing a story. You're constructing a narrative through this. And I believe that his intent inside of this is that when you yourself get to make that story, it becomes part of you. You get to be part of this. And so the act of experiencing and interpreting and trying to make sense of the show, you yourself become part of that larger narrative. And that's an incredible gift. That's an incredible gift that Ai Weiwei is giving to his audience to become part of the very piece itself. So why would one want to make an exact replica of twisted rebar? And I'll tell you some of the ideas that I have, but I want you to know that you're welcome to come up with your own inside of this. Rebar is iron. It's made out of iron, one of the most common metals on Earth. It's incredibly dense, it's malleable, and it's dark, right? It forms the core of our planet. And it's used as a structural support because it's so malleable and because it's so strong and because it melts at incredibly high temperatures and all those sort of things. Well, when you turn it into rebar, or when you turn it into marble, you're creating an incredible inversion. Now you have a material which is by its nature translucent. It pulls light into it and it projects it. Marble is fragile. Every one of these, if I were to try to bend these, they would just break. So now we've got this material which is, in a sense, kind of the absolute opposite. It's light, it's translucent, it's fragile. So he's inverted them. Now we know suddenly that we're dealing with something which is almost the opposite of rebar. It's just in the same form. The next part of this is, so the title of the piece is Rebar Encased. The next part of it is that we have the set of cases. They're all enclosed in cases, and he told me that he wanted me to arrange them myself, but that I had to have some of them where the marble piece was set up on top of it, some of them where they were open so you could look down inside of the case, and some where the cases were closed, like these. And so there's a balance. I needed to strike a balance in there, and this is the balance which I have struck. But I could have, I suppose, done it any number of ways. What do we see when we see these cases? I think that for me, in the backdrop of the name list and this video, it becomes incredibly difficult not to see each one of these cases as a coffin, and that they are reminiscent of that. And as soon as we say a coffin, then what these pieces of rebar are, or what they signify, becomes really different. It becomes something very different from rebar. Each one of them becomes something akin to, say, a relic, a Buddhist relic, or they become the spine of a human spine. So they become potentially the individual twisted bodies of the children that were inside of those buildings. That interpretation, I think, is made even stronger when you think about what the cultural associations are with marble. Marble is a primary funerary material. So marble is what we use to make our the headstones in graveyards. And it's used for mausoleums, all sorts of things like that. And then the one piece of information that I was given is that the source of this marble is from a set of quarries northwest of Beijing, and it's those quarries where all of the marble for Mao Zedong's mausoleum was sourced. So now we have a really incredible equation. What does it mean if he's using the same marble for this set of sculptures that are used for the mausoleum for the founder of of China, the current Chinese state, of course? That's a fairly incredible statement to have made. Ai Weiwei is also a collector of furniture. He loves classical Chinese furniture, or at least he has a large collection of it. And I've puzzled a lot as to why he used this particular wood. And I have a theory. It hasn't been confirmed by him, but I think it's a very intriguing one. And that is that this wood is called huanghuali. It's a type of rosewood. And it was a rosewood that's used in traditional Chinese furniture a lot. It's one of the most cherished rosewood woods for furniture. And when I went and began to read about it, what I discovered is that there is a figure. The figure that people talk about with this rosewood are these little tiny knots, and they're all over these coffins, or these cases. And that figure in Chinese is called guilian, which means ghost face. So we have these set of cases that are covered with a figure called ghost face. We've got a set of twisted rebar carved out into marble that are human-sized, that are setting on top of this. So that's a story. That's a narrative that's there. I've given you some of my interpretation of it, but of course, you're welcome to come up with your own set, and what those set of associations may or may not mean. So there you have it. Any questions?
These pieces haven't been shown elsewhere together, or is this a unique? Well, you posed them, but have these been traveling around elsewhere?
Yeah, they've been shown at other places, but this is certainly the first show here in Northwest Washington. So that's pretty special. It's pretty amazing that we're able to have this set of work here.
Where are the marble pieces actually made?
They were made in China. So I believe they were probably made at Ai Weiwei's studio, but I don't actually know the precise spot.
What is done at the foundry in Walla Walla? You mentioned that he has a foundry there.
He doesn't, he's not casting work at Walla Walla Foundry. This was work which was sent there, and they had actually a display. They put these out on display at the foundry for a period of time. Yeah. So, yeah.
And these are also assembled over there in China?
Everything, all the pieces here were all assembled in China. So the woodwork and all the design, everything was manufactured there. And then they were crated and they were shipped overseas. So when we're done with this exhibition, all these pieces are going to be shipped off to Berlin. So I'm assuming that there's an exhibition that's lined up in Germany or maybe somewhere in Europe for this work once we're done. Yeah. Around the, you're just going to be recording? So around this show, you'll see there, I have 3 quotes by Ai Weiwei. And these 3 quotes were pulled from his Twitter feed. So Ai Weiwei, one of his primary ways in which he communicates with the world is through the social media platform Twitter. And it's a fascinating feed to read through. He's incredibly concise and very, very strong language. And I went through and I simply pulled out quotes that I thought had some bearing on this exhibition or opened up our understanding of how Ai Weiwei views himself. And I think that it's really, really important when we look at artwork to really try to embrace the logic of the artists themselves, to really try to understand it as they philosophically understand the world and not bring to it our own assumptions about what art should or should not be. Because I think that when we do that, we really limit our own capacity for growth with regard to how it is that we frame and understand how other people are interpreting our world. And an exhibition by Ai Weiwei is an incredible opportunity for us to grow and learn different ways of making sense or clarifying those things which are happening around us. So Ai Weiwei is a political artist. He's a humanitarian artist. He's a material philosopher. He's many, 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 many different things. But in the end, he's Ai Weiwei, right? He is his person, just as I am my person, just as you are your person. And there is a selflessness that's inside of this work that I think is oftentimes missed. And that is this sense that he's relinquishing his own ownership of it, not in lieu of relinquishing himself, but in the desire to include the rest of the world that wants to come in and participate with it. Are you going to separate out the sound? Can you separate out the sound feed and everything? Okay, so you'll be able to figure that out. So Ai Weiwei's show, of course, is occupying the main Nichols Gallery. But with this exhibition, I think if you're presenting it to gallery visitors, I do encourage you to forge that arc across the museum right now. We've got a very interesting arc. So in the North Gallery, we've got Goya. In the main gallery, we have Ai Weiwei. And in the atrium, we have Dana Lynn Louis. And one of the things that I've done in this show to help forge that link is in the Goya exhibition, you'll actually see that I've taken more of these of Ai Weiwei's statements from Twitter, and I've put those in the wall on the wall there in the Goya exhibition. And that's because I see a link between Ai Weiwei and Goya, which is quite direct in terms of the way that their two minds approached and processed these types of human catastrophes and the abrogation of responsibility. They're both very, they both feel very strongly that one must call on those power structures, call out those power structures which abrogate their responsibility, and in so doing, really take advantage of the common people, of the ordinary people. Right? So the exhibition, which is occupying the North Gallery this time around, is called Sleep of Reason, Selected Prints by Francisco Goya. And it gets its title from this very, very famous print, which is El sueño de la razón produce monstruos, which means the sleep of reason produces monsters. And this is a print which came out of a series that he completed called the Caprichos, the Caprices. And this is a series of prints that he produced and printed during his lifetime, which was looking at the really capricious nature of society, especially Spanish society during the time that he was living. So those pieces are easily identifiable. When you look around the exhibition, they're the ones that are vertically oriented. And then also in this exhibition are prints from his series, his monumental series called The Disasters of War. And these are pieces which were so controversial that he couldn't publish them during his lifetime. And I think there's only a handful of lifetime impressions from each one of these prints, which he presented to his friends. All the prints that we see here were not printed by Goya, but were rather printed about 35 years after he had died. And when you look at them, and then you learn a little bit more about Goya, you can kind of understand why. Goya was the court painter for 4 successive kings of Spain. So you can imagine that he was, he was very savvy politically to be able to make it through this time, a time period that was just incredibly violent and filled with an amazing amount of disregard for human life. So when you look through these pieces, especially the Disasters of War, you see just these unbelievable images of torture and killing and robbery and people taking advantage of other people. A lot of power dynamics that are here, and I think that the thing which is fascinating about this is why would Goya have decided that he would use the print as his medium of choice? And when you begin to look into it, what you find is that the print was at that time something that wasn't popular. People commented and looked at his huge paintings. They looked at his big oil paintings. These are the paintings that were hung up on the walls of the palace and things like that. But these prints were understood as a form of a much more democratic object. They could be printed in large numbers, they could be distributed easily, but they were something which were found inside of bound volumes, so they had sort of a private nature to them. And he used this as one of his primary means, for making commentary, social commentary, which he would not have been able to make in his large paintings. And so each one of these prints, walk around each one of these prints, you'll see along the bottom of them there is usually a sentence or just a handful of words which give you some sort of sense of what his interpretation is. So, this print, for instance, Murió la verdad, that's the death of truth. This is the penultimate image from the Disasters of War. And then next to it I've hung the very final one, will she be revived? So this is these are questions, these are statements. He's setting you up by giving you these various small sentences, he's giving you a chance to interpret the imagery inside of that print. Very much like the sleep of reason produces monsters. One of the great pleasures of this show is to really look and see what an incredible draftsman Goya was and kind of how fertile his imagination was. You get in close and you'll see these people that are turning into animals. Here's this figure that's turning into a head of some sort of terrible eagle or vulture or some sort of thing like this. This print, Against the Common Good, shows this man who's tabulating out some sort of crime, who knows, and out of his head, out of his ears, he's sprouting the wings of a bat. Another one, here's a dead figure, it's called Las Resultas, which means the results. And you have a dead figure who's being consumed by these sort of horrific bat-like creatures. They're just incredible compositions, and they're really it's really amazing to have the opportunity to sit down or stand and get up close to them and see those compositions and to spend some time looking at all the stuff. There's always little things that are hiding in the background that you oftentimes don't pay attention to, especially when you're looking at them in reproduction in books. What else? I think that covers it for this room, unless you have something you think I should. Tell me when you're ready. We're good? So when Ai Weiwei said yes to his exhibition, I knew at that moment that I had this incredible opportunity, that I really had this chance to forge an arc of experience across the museum. And that's sort of a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And that I was really interested in forging something that had to do with how the artist mind rises to confront a catastrophe, death, earthquakes, war, you name it. And so I chose Goya as a historical counterpoint, so that's going back through time. And then going forward, or going, contemporaneously, drawing something here to the northwest. One of the artists that I have been particularly interested in over the year, I've been following for many years, is Dana Lynn Louis, who's a Portland-based artist who spent years and years working in Western Africa. And she founded a cultural center there in Mali called the Kofalin Cultural Center. And she's worked and done all this stuff there. And then in 2012, there was the Mali Civil War. And in the aftermath of this bloody war, Mali has just been occupied by all these insurgent groups, including Al-Qaeda. And as a result, she isn't able to go back there. And so all these relationships that she has with Mali or in Mali, she's had to put on hold, perhaps for the rest of her life, definitely and definitely for now, okay? And out of that, and out of some other events in her life, she began to make work which was very much about light. It was very much about these types of floating structures, and very much about how do we channel energy through ourselves such that we can